The Earth will be threatened by a cosmic event in 2025 that may cost trillions of dollars in damage and throw the entire planet into disarray. Additionally, this is not a prominent TV channel's main news. According to NASA and other space organizations, this is the case. Why did you not learn about this earlier? In spite of the fact that genuine issues are not as well known as Vengas predictions or Mayan calendars, scientists are aware of and preparing for the impending catastrophe. Additionally, you've undoubtedly heard of Edge of the Fly. Recall how 40 Starlink satellites that Elon Musk had unexpectedly lost in February? Have you heard about the swarm satellite network issues that started abruptly descending to Earth? Maybe you've read about the Carrington incident, which occurred in 1859 and caused the globe to experience temporary turmoil as telegraphs failed all around the planet. Additionally, there are connections between these occurrences and the 2025 tragedy at Lud. And with Elon Musk, we'll begin examining these incidents. The next 49 satellites of the international internet network Starlink were routinely launched into intermediate orbit on February 3, 2022, using the rocket Falcon 9. Everything was going well as they docked 350 kilometers above the surface of the planet. On February 8, however, SpaceX declared that 40 of the 49 satellites had been lost. Because the 67 millionth rocket launch ended up in the milk, the firm suffered a significant financial damage. Additionally, the cost of the satellites themselves is not included in this. However, why did this occur? The sun is to blame since it chose to muck things up on February 4, one day after the launch. This solar wind sent a significant amount of stuff in the direction of the Earth, and when it got there, it reacted with the magnetic field, causing a geomagnetic storm as we know it. The incident's collateral damage was eliminated by the Starlink satellites. The direct impacts of magnetic storms can be mitigated to some extent by contemporary satellites. The safe mode function that Starlink includes shields them from electromagnetic interference. However, satellites that have not yet attained orbit cannot hide from drift. Not by an explosion or anomaly that burnt their electronics, but rather because they plummeted trivially in the Earth's atmosphere as though landing on it. 40 satellites were destroyed. How come? Due to the fact that space is not truly empty, and this is especially true around the Earth, even at an altitude of hundreds of kilometers, there is no vacuum and no odor. Even 300 kilometers beyond the Earth, there is some oxygen present, and 3,000 kilometers above that, the interplanetary environment starts. Let's ignore the reality that there is still some degree of vacuum. The issue with Starlink satellites, which currently occupies our attention, is the same as every other issue with objects in Earth orbit, including the ISS. Consider yourself walking against the wind. It is easy to walk while it is weaker and difficult when it is stronger. About this is what space stations and satellites encounter. Along the route, they battle environmental obstacles. And the solar wind, which is composed of fast-moving particles, makes this resistance stronger. The satellite's environment gets denser, which makes orbiting them harder and harder. As a result, the satellites slow down and start to sink, plunging deeper into the Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere is considerably denser there, and there is a chance of an uncontrollable fall. All near-Earth vehicles utilize corrective engines to fix issues while conditions are calm. The ISS is capable of losing up to 100 meters of height every day, and its orbit is adjusted roughly once per month. But then odd things started to happen. The pace of descent has risen 10 times since December 2021. It has increased to 20 kilometers each year by April of this year. As you can expect, the pattern is not ideal, and what's more, it has nothing to do with the 40 Starlink satellites that have seen a single flare. Everything leads to the notion that the space surrounding the Earth is getting denser, making it harder for spacecraft to move through it, and not just a little bit, but many times at once. Who is at fault? The wind and the sun are back. Only now, instead of referring to lone flashes, we are discussing a rising number of them, which is saturating the Earth's orbit with more and more particles. The true irony is found right here. It is based on the fact that the associated procedures are not secret. Simply said, a new cycle of activity on our sun has begun and will climax around 2025. Since 1843, when scientists started measuring solar cycles, it has been well established that the 11-year, 22-year, century, 500-year, and other world cycles occur. The current issues not just in space but also on Earth are related to the 11-year cycle, and the electromagnetic activity of the Sun is what is to blame for these issues. The magnetic poles of our star alternately face north and south on a regular basis of 11 years. The disordered and impressionistic-like magnetic lines then engage in a fierce battle. They engage in interaction, twisting, flipping, colliding, and other possible actions. And the areas of the sun with the most solar activity are those where the magnetic field is disturbed and sunspots emerge. Don't use fancy language, just discuss the effects. The flares that propel enormous amounts of mass into space at speeds close to light are the direct outcome of this magnetic disorder and sunspots. The northern lights are a well-known example of such particles slamming against the Earth's magnetic field. Less well-known is the overconsolidation of the atmosphere, which contributes to the earlier mentioned drift of passengers. Let's now discuss the third instance of a catastrophic geomagnetic storm that occurred in 1859. In honor of astronomer Richard Carrington, who saw the lights firsthand, it is also known as the Carrington event. Usually, it takes 2 to 3 days for solar flares to have an impact on Earth. The topic is not an 8-minute light show. Even if we're talking about larger particles, the distance from the Sun to Earth is covered in a few or 3 days. Carrington, though, observed something far worse. A flare whose coronal mass ejection reached Earth in about 18 hours. Because of earlier outbursts clearing the road somewhat, the solar superstorm impacted Earth considerably more quickly. North America and Europe had a telegraph failure. This was accompanied by strange phenomena, including a machine that could transmit a message even when it wasn't powered by electricity. Also, resist the urge to chuckle when your grandma complains of having a headache as a result of a magnetic storm. Scientists claim that 75% of people can genuinely feel their impacts. Fortunately, it won't be lethal, but there's a catch. Even telegraphs were uncommon in 1859, and most people rode on horses. Television and internet satellites were not an option. And this is for the modern world, recalling the jolting telegraphs of a century and a half ago on Kinta. It would appear childish for Elon Musk to have brought down 40 satellites. Scientists don't even attempt to foresee the effects since our electricity grids, satellites, smart stuffers, sock puppets, and those fortnights will all suffer severe damage. They only make rudimentary calculations, one of which estimates that the harm to the global economy will be in the neighborhood of $4.5 trillion. Notional, why? Because not everything in this situation is valued in monetary terms. Although GPS satellites appear to cost a few $100 million on paper, this does not guarantee that failing satellites will be sent into orbit using that sum of money. Similar to how electrical systems will need to be reconstructed, this time using labor and materials whose production may also be impacted. Everything has the potential to be so awful in general that it is terrifying to consider. So going back to the 11-year solar cycles, let's consider some dry math. It is easy to conclude from the graph of the previous centuries that they have developed positively or negatively according to the same pattern. The Sun increases in strength throughout the initial years, achieves its peak activity, and then slows down. In particular, we are currently in the 25th solar cycle, which started in 2019 and is only just reaching its apex. Magnetic storm activity increased in 2021 compared to earlier years, and this is only the beginning. If the graph, which displayed the same pattern 24 times, repeats itself for a 25th time, the Sun will achieve its peak activity by 2025, at which point a storm with the intensity of 1859 might be anticipated. The 24th cycle went by and reached its height in our lives, and the most attentive person will now pose a rational inquiry. Why then did we not observe anything? The answer isn't very upbeat. We did it. But you and I were just fortunate. On July 23, 2012, the Sun experienced a coronal mass ejection of extraordinarily high power whose amplitude exactly matched the ejection of 1859. Only the star's spin, which shot the apocalypse's bullet past Earth, kept us alive. The flare would have been aimed towards our planet if it had occurred 9 days later. So it is not worthwhile to claim that we have not witnessed mega flares and that everything here is a fabrication of reptiloids. By cosmic standards, the little 9-day difference that mankind experienced was pure chance. Prior incidents either took place during a lesser storm or lacked the same level of devastating power due to the era's primitive technology. The risks are substantially greater now. Also, 2 of these items are extremely amusing. The first is that a mini end of the planet might occur in 2012. The second is that the epoch of human space exploration occurred during a peaceful, sunny time. In the middle of the previous decade, SpaceX, commercial satellites, Mars rovers, and other nations' space projects began to emerge, right near the conclusion of the relatively quiet Sun cycle. If you look closer, Neil Armstrong's crew somehow avoided the solar flare and traveled to the Moon. Anyway, be careful the next time you want to attribute your misfortune on fate. We both have a lot of luck, you and Io, and there is also good news. However, if the influence on the space business is substantially dramatized, it is still not worthwhile. Other space agencies like SpaceX and NASA are not stupid. Additionally, engineers have long held the belief that there is no poor weather. There is merely inadequate planning. In order to increase the amount of solar wind and flares, they are preparing the Artemis lunar mission, fresh iterations of the Starlink satellites, and other space missions. Space weather monitoring is the responsibility of whole organizations, and although it was practically unimaginable in 1859 to respond to a solar flare in just 18 hours, in 2022 it will be sufficient to make the required adjustments to spacecraft operations. I'll see you later, pals.